Hey, how's it going, guys? Thank you so much for watching episode 104 of Boundary Break. I'm the host, She Says, and I'm going to make this really quick. I just really want to thank Codename Gamma for making this camera. It was amazing, and it came out so shortly after the game's release. So you are a wizard, sir, and I really appreciate you. And if you appreciate the camera that he made, there's links to him down below. I think you should check him out. But anyways, in the interest of saving your time, I'm going to cut you loose right now and show you what we got. All right, let's do it. Alright, so I wanted to come out of the gate really strong with this one and show you some left behind content. Now, this discovery wasn't found by me, but it was presented to me and asked to be shared on the show. I still want to give credit to @CafePear on Twitter and thank him for pointing this out to me. It's a unused beta version of the Orphanage. Now, what sets this Orphanage apart from the final version of the Orphanage is that a lot of the walls and objects aren't textured, which is kind of cool, but also the layout itself is slightly different. Starting off with this table over here that looks like it was supposed to have a blanket draped over it. Normally there'd be a reception desk right here in the center, but here in the beta version, that's not the case. Actually, if you go upstairs too, you'll see that area where Sherry has to run around is completely different. And if I have to speculate here, I have to assume that this beta version of the Orphanage did not have that Sherry sequence in mind when it was made. Because for one thing, there's a lot more space up here, whereas in the final version, it's a little more crowded. But again, this is amazing to me. Normally, stuff like this is hidden in the game files, which, to be fair, it still is, but it's great that we can talk about it here on the show because it's literally behind the other Orphanage. The next thing here is pretty funny, but I do want to take you play by play what happened here. So I was originally recording this scene to show you the outside of the clock tower when it's not in cutscene mode. The game does a pretty good job of doing the exterior of all these buildings almost at any given time. So it looks really great when you step outside the boundaries of the police station. But the clock tower uses two separate models here, which is evidenced by looking at the other side of the wall. And this is where it got pretty good. I'm just about ready to wrap up this footage, and then I look over to the right, and I see Mr. X walking around in a completely different area of the map, which means that something very untraditional is happening here. Normally, when a video game implies that a character is off screen somewhere, they're not actually there. There's usually just sound effects played out to make it seem like it is. However, if Mr. X didn't already stress you guys out enough, the truth is he is literally walking around this map. And some of you in the comments are probably ready to say, well, he teleports to you at certain times. And that's entirely true, but those are scripted events. In fact, I've heard through the grapevine that you can get two Mr. X's to show up at once if you get the field Mr. X and the event Mr. X in the same area. But if you're looking to see something like that, I would recommend you go check out Son of a Glitch. But let's not get off of the subject of Mr. X just yet. Now, the very first time you get a glimpse of him is when he smashes through this jail cell and crushes this dude's, yeah. And I was getting a lot of reviewer requests asking me if he's actually behind the wall. And I'm very happy to report that he is. It's just really difficult to show you what that looks like because the lighting in this game is very specific. So areas outside of the boundaries tend to be really dark like this. But I did crank up the brightness and contrast for you so that you can kind of get an idea of what you're looking at. And the first time that you have to engage with Mr. X, he's pushing aside this helicopter. And a lot of people on Twitter, which by the way you can follow me here, wanted to know when he appears there exactly. And the answer starts to reveal itself as you walk about halfway through the hallway on the other side of the bend. I can slow it down and show you the exact frame in which he spawns in, which funny enough is not in the exact coordinate that he should be, so he kind of has to move himself into place. Which is really funny because in a different scene with Claire, we got the police chief ready to spring at her, but if you took the camera around the bend on this scene, you'd see that he is in fact waiting there and he's in an idle pose. Alright, I guess now's a good time to talk about some menu stuff. The first thing I want to mention is the game over screen. Normally the only thing that the player can see after they die is a little pitty pat of blood in the upper left hand corner against what looks like a sheet of metal. While zooming the camera out doesn't do too much to solve this mystery, it does show you that this image is shown in a 3D space, and the title menu of Resident Evil 2 has two things going on. When you're about to start a story mission, it shows you a 3D area of the last area you visited. However, that entire sweeping shot of Raccoon City is not fully 3D. It's a series of 2D textures made to look like it has depth. But I gotta say, even better than that is a weird piece of HUD that's left inside of a cutscene of the game. Now, I asked my developer source as well as people on Twitter. Nobody knew the answer to this question, and the best guess that I could gather was that it's a camera coordinate, possibly to position stuff for the user interface. But without getting a direct word from the developers, there's no way to know exactly what this thing is. But since we're on the subject of cutscenes, let's talk about a couple right now. How about that opening cutscene with Claire? If you take the camera underneath the gas station, you can find the unique object used when pumping gas, as well as Leon's Jeep, which is pretty crazy. But that kendo gun shop scene, where he takes his daughter into a room and you're not allowed to see what happens, well, there's still not a lot going on once they close that door. There is a couple of frames of unique animation that the player's not allowed to see, but the room itself is really tiny and unpopulated with anything. In fact, the one object that you can see from the roof is a roof detail that's supposed to show a skylight, and its geometry just happens to clip into the small box that represents the room that the kendo gun shop owner walks into. And the same can be said for Ada when you first meet her and she walks into that door way off in the distance. There's a couple of frames of walking animation, the model then stops, then gets removed. And the same could be said for Annette as well. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Okay, good. But you know what, while we're here too, I can show you that before the cutscene starts, the jacket that Ada gives to Leon is already loaded into the map and suspending in mid-air until Leon eventually sits underneath it. Here's something that is used in a scene, but you can't see it in full view for whatever reason. One of which being Claire with a motorcycle helmet on. The cutscenes in the game make sure to angle it so that you never see it from the front for some reason, but it is fully modeled. And if they were going to hide anything, I suppose, I guess it's just this big dopey smile she seems to have while she's riding it. I don't know. Which is pretty cool, but this next thing I know that the player's not allowed to see. It's the back of the model of the final form of William Birkin. Even in the character model viewer, it's inside of a train car and the camera is limited to inside the train car. However, moving outside the boundaries shows you that a lot of his tentacles and all that stuff are just giant donuts that spin around to make it look like it's just a giant tentacle. This is why they didn't want you to see this, because rather than immerse you in the character model, this sort of takes you outside of that and shows you the developer trickery used to pull this off, which is a real shame. I feel like people can learn a lot from this if they were allowed to see it. So there's a couple of loose ends I wanted to cover before we move on to the final scene, and the first one I want to show you is this collection of orphanage items way far away from the actual orphanage. In fact, it's closer to the gun shop than anything else. Some of the items include artwork, a placemat, party favors, a cardboard box, and a bunk bed. Also, I found this to be really entertaining. The rain is all 2D textures, of course, going down across the screen, but the rain is always supposed to be facing the player camera. So if we take the camera coordinates outside of the player position, you'll be able to see the rain from the side, which makes it almost look like glass shards. And over here we have the scene where Chief Irons is on the other side of the door and the player is only allowed to see the shadows of his feet. Now this was something that really surprised me. When you take the camera on the other side of that door, Chief Irons is fully animated. Although getting a good camera angle was kind of tough, so I've tilted the footage to be upright. But yeah, like you saw, he walks away and everything, except he walks through a wall. I guess Chief Irons is a boundary breaker too. And then we got this scene with Sherry in the vent. So Sherry ends up crawling through this vent, dropping out on the other side to open the door for Claire. And naturally, I wanted to see what happens when you take the camera on the other side of that door. Now, unlike a lot of scenes that I've shown you here for Resident Evil 2, this one's not quite as organic. She gets warped into that area, and then she runs up to the door and opens it. So there's still a little bit of animation that you weren't meant to see, but she does not organically go through a vent and come out the other side of another vent. And speaking of crawling around, of course, we got one of the most famous scenes in the game right now, the crawling policeman. Lots and lots of people wanted to know what it looks like on the other side while he's getting mauled by a zombie. And believe it or not, although it's really tough to see, it's actually happening. And his legs really do come off, which means that they were really attached to start with. But again, I'm just shocked because none of this, absolutely none of this gets shown to the player. But I really admire the effort. Also, speaking of zombies, did you know that all the limbs to the zombies, actually the entire skeleton of the zombies, have a fleshy inside to them, which you can normally see if you blow off one of their limbs. But even when they're all attached, the meat on the inside is still there. Something that Mortal Kombat 9 couldn't even say for itself with its X-ray vision. Also, I thought this was pretty cool. Mr. X has a receiver in the side of his head. Now, I know that some of you are probably ready to come at me and say, hey, you can just look at this in a model viewer, or hey, I noticed this while playing the game. Fair enough. There's two things that, are worth mentioning though. One is that the umbrella logo is on the front, the visible side, and one thing that makes this whole segment worthwhile to any person, I suppose, is that on the other side, there are additional details to this receiver that you can't see as the player. And one thing that I really wanted to show you again before the final scene is a cutscene played out from a single position. And when you do that, you start to notice a lot of things. One of which being that the characters' animations are frozen when they're out of shot, but also the lighting completely changes depending on where the camera's pointed at.
No, I am not the priority here.
Lieutenant, I'm not just gonna leave you here.
I'm giving you an order, rookie. You save yourself first. I'd come with you, but I'd just slow you down.
And lastly, here is a tour of the last area of the game. I'd figured we'd take a look, but I wasn't expecting to find half the stuff that I did find, which is to say, it seems there's a lot to show underneath the map. Like over here with the terminal exit that you're meant to see, underneath is the broken train cart and debris that was used in a previous scene. Also way off in the distance, way past where they're walking towards, is another exit terminal, and underneath that is another exit terminal. What is going on here? Not only that, but this map shares the same loading zone as the final area of the game. Taking the camera all the way behind the characters, way past this map, you would eventually load in the tunnel where you had your final boss fight. Hey, thank you very much for watching the video. If you are a longtime subscriber, this message is really meant more for you, not the new guys. So you could definitely clock out now if you guys are new. But I got nominated for a Shorty Award, which is kind of crazy. I don't know how anybody over there recognized Boundary Break, but this is really cool. Very honored by the nomination. Normally I would just be flattered enough with the nomination and just kind of leave it alone, especially with the fact that the people that I'm up against are these huge streamers. Like there's like some really popular like Roblox streamers and stuff like that, so they have a huge audience. But I just thought I'd give it a shot for some reason, mostly just kind of represent the informational gaming side of YouTube, you know, with like Did You Know Gaming, Son of a Glitch, Beta64, Summoning Salt. We don't normally get nominated for this kind of stuff, so I just think like how awesome would it be if for at one time a channel like mine won an award like the Shorty Awards. So if you're up for it, there's links down below for where you can vote for Boundary Break, but it does say She Says. Let's be real, it's for the show. I'm just the vessel that gives the information out. But yeah, I mean, if you want to help me make this happen, guys, let's do it. I think it would be really cool. Can you imagine me on stage with this hat and this ugly coat accepting an award? I'd like to see that happen. All right, but anyways, regardless of any of that, I really do appreciate you guys watching this episode. And I don't know what the next one will be. I think I'll leave it up to you guys. You know, I haven't done that in a while. So the top most voted comment that is suggesting a game that I cover on the show, I'll try my best to cover it. All right? Take care, guys.